Hello, everyone. My name is Aliki Burrell, and I'm the High School Programming Coordinator at the JED Foundation. I want to wish everyone a happy Wednesday and welcome you to today's webinar, which is supporting the mental health of your team. We are very glad that you could join us today for this important topic, and we hope today's presentation is helpful for you as we continue to be flexible and adaptive in this uncertain time. Before we begin, we'd like to share a couple of housekeeping items. First, we would like to point out that the information provided in this webinar is not intended to be a substitute for or to be relied upon as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it intended to be a substitute for or to be relied upon as legal advice or counsel. This webinar is being presented for informational purposes only. 2, if you need closed captioning services at any point, please click the button on your dashboard that says CC. Third, this webinar will be recorded, and the recording, along with other materials like today's slides, will be provided to all registrants in 2 days. And finally, if at any point you have a question during the presentation for our speakers, please type it into the question box on your dashboard. We will do our best to answer your questions during the Q&A and at the end of today's presentation. So, Wanamo, please share your screen. Okay, fantastic. So, as mentioned before, today's webinar is how to support the mental health of your teen in the transition out of high school. Next slide, please. Perfect. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the JED Foundation, JED is a nonprofit that protects emotional health and prevents suicide for our nation's teens and young adults. Through our programs such as JED Campus and JED High School, we equip teens and young adults to navigate mental health challenges, to seek and give help, and emotionally prepare to enter adulthood and fulfill their potential. We also help high school students become emotionally prepared for the transition to college and adult life, partner with high schools, colleges, and universities to build a comprehensive approach to support student mental health, as well as educate communities to support the emotional well-being and mental health of young adults. Okay, next slide. So I want to take a moment to thank our panelists, who I will now introduce. We have Suzanne Button, PhD, Senior Clinical Director of High School Programming here at the JED Foundation. Dr. Susan Button is the Senior Clinical Director of High School Programming for the JED Foundation and has almost 30 years of experience working with adolescents, children, their families, and the systems that serve and educate youth. Susie came to the JED from her role as a policy fellow with Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago, where she supported the implementation, monitoring, and sustaining of large-scale procedural and practice changes in behavioral health, social services, and educational settings. Dr. Button is a licensed clinical psychologist in New York State and is the parent of 2 teenagers. We also have Wanamo Okoya. Wanamo is the Director of High School Program Implementation at the JED Foundation, supporting schools. She is a healing-centered educator who started her career as a middle school teacher. Bridging the health and education sectors, she has designed and implemented programs that center equity, and recently was a fellow of the Blue Ridge Labs at the Robin Hood Foundation, learning how to practically use tech to scale solutions for social issues. So I'll pass it on to Dr. Wanamo. She can take it away. Oh, Wanamo, sorry, you're on mute.
Of course. Thanks, Aliki. I appreciate the introduction and excited to be here with Dr. Button talking about this topic. So to begin, I'll just go through our objectives for today. So we want you to walk away here with an understanding of the mental health trends facing young people, understand the key mechanisms for reducing risk and supporting success for students, discuss some strategies for emotionally preparing students for life after high school. It can be a really difficult transition, whether or not they're going on to college, a gap year, or the workforce, and also know where to go to identify resources. So Dr. Button and I are going to go through a number of slides and present for a little bit, but then we want to have a conversation and we'd love to take some questions from y'all as well. So to begin, I would love to get your insight on what is meant by mental health from your perspective. So the way that you use this, and Aliki is going to put, if she hasn't already, put the link in the chat. So if you can click on that link, it'll take you to a poll where you can type in responses. So from your perspective, what is mental health? And if you're having trouble with the poll, you can let us know and we can try to support. Emotional state. Yep, what else? And you can put in more than one response if you have different responses. Grace. So I wonder if that means giving grace, giving your oneself grace, or giving other people grace. What else? And if you're having trouble accessing the poll, please let us know. Oh, some people are putting it in the chat. That's easier for you, you can do that. So someone put in depression and anxiety. Mental health are thoughts and emotions that impact our day-to-day functioning. Yep. Depression. So these are things folks think about when talking about mental health. And we are at the JED Foundation think it's really important to talk about mental health and to normalize talking about mental health. But the World Health Organization defines it as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their potential and can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So y'all have touched on a little bit of that, but oftentimes folks think about anxiety, depression, think of mental health issues, right? Ones that we think about more commonly, but mental health is a state of well-being. And it's one that we should all be striving for. So we like to talk about the parallels between mental health and physical health because we think it's critically important we know that it's critically important for all of us. So just talking a little bit about youth mental health. So there are rising levels right now of the things that y'all mentioned of anxiety, depression, worry, difficulty concentrating in young people. There are also rising rates of suicide ideation, and suicide is a leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 10 or second leading cause of death between young people between the ages of 10 and 24 years old. And students of color, students who identify as LGBTQ+, international students, first generation students, and other marginalized populations face additional mental health stressors and higher risk for poor mental health outcomes. So the state of mental health right now is pretty bleak, isn't positive, but we at the JED Foundation, and I think why all of you are here today, is because we're striving for a world in which young people achieve that state of well-being, right, with regard to their mental health, that we give them the support that they need in order to experience that. Here's some more things, right? So youth are really well poised to lead the way for mental health, right? So this is the optimistic side of this, that they're a really culturally accepting generation. I remember when I was young, people would whisper the word therapy. Now young people are proudly announcing that they're in therapy, encouraging their peers to do that. They're a really culturally accepting generation. They're talking about mental health more than anyone else. They're honest in their portrayals and discussions of their experiences with distress and mental health challenges. We've got a really vulnerable generation and have an opportunity to capitalize on that. And they naturally want to help their friends and go to their friends when they're in distress. So while we hope that they go to their parents and their teachers, young people are more likely to go to their friends than anyone else. So there's a hopeful aspect to this, and that's why we wanted to bring folks together to talk about this, particularly as young people are heading into a difficult transition and moving out of high school at the end of a really, really difficult school year. So how you can sort of help, right? One thing is, while adolescents and young people think that they don't care or express that they don't care what you're saying, your perspective can be really valuable, right? So talking to them about their stressors, talking to them about the fact that physical health and mental health are both normal aspects of our health can be really important, and sharing that perspective with them time and time again, not a lecture-based way. And Dr. Brett and I will talk about exactly how you have those conversations, but sharing your perspective is really important. And then normalizing the fact that problems are an important part of growing up and maturing for young people, that there are a lot of misunderstandings with regard to mental health challenges and that they're normal. Even disclosing to your child that you have struggled with mental health issues and how you've coped can be a way to draw connections and help normalize what they're feeling, and build a bridge between you and them, because it normalizes something that might be stigmatized. And then also encouraging them to work out their problems with their friends, family, other caring adults in their lives can be a really critical way to help young people work through the mental health challenges that they're experiencing that are really normal during a period of transition. So while we know that connection is key and that it is a protective factor against suicide and against other mental health issues, what happens very oftentimes is this isolation conundrum, right? Where we have a young person in distress who wants help, doesn't know how to ask for it, feels like they'll get in trouble, like they'll be a burden. And they've got family members or friends who want to help, but they don't know how to. They don't want to push them away. They felt like if they bring it up, that it'll make the problem larger. And then what happens is this vacuum. So we know that connection is critically important, but what happens is a vacuum is created between the young person and the adult who's capable and willing to help them. So what we want to do is turn those arrows in the opposite direction and foster connection, both with regard to young people feeling comfortable asking for help, and with the adults in their lives feeling like they can offer the help necessary. And transitioning out of high school makes this even more challenging, right? So they've waited 4 years to get out of the state, but now the world looks really very different. So we've developed, and on our website, set2go.org, and you can find in-depth information about supporting this transition from out of high school, so to college and adulthood. And it's really never too early to start preparing. So if some of you have sophomores or juniors, thinking about this really early on can be helpful. But even if you have seniors who are going onto the workforce or college after right now, you can intervene now and start getting them ready. So our website has a lot more materials, but I'm just going to quickly talk to you about a couple of things you can help your child get ready for this big change. So one is helping them practice independent living skills and life skills, right? So how are they going to manage money? I'm really embarrassed to say that my freshman year, I overdrafted my account a good amount because I just couldn't compute. And I paid the bank a lot of money. How do you manage your time? Right now, there are clear transitions. If they're in school physically, there'd be bells helping them get from one class to the next. Now they've been learning virtually. They might have calendar alerts, right? How do we help them manage their time? Appointment scheduling. I think oftentimes young people, even up until the age of their 17, their parents are scheduling their doctor's appointments. They're dropping them at their doctor's appointments. They're going with them. Maybe give them an opportunity to start scheduling their own appointments to build those independent life skills that they'll need once they leave your home. Help them engage and model this for them, right? And self-care behavior. So eating well, sleeping, moving their bodies regularly, not just for weight loss, but just because it's an important part of being mentally healthy and being a well individual. And communicating, right? So young people need to connect with their parents, with their family members, folks back home. But oftentimes when they leave the home, they don't have a plan for making those connections. So they feel isolated, feel homesick, and then that contributes negatively to the transition. So helping them develop a plan of how they're going to communicate with you, with their friends, with other family. We've got a lot of technological solutions to that. And I think the pandemic has helped us to flex this muscle a bit. But what is your plan going to be once this changes to prevent you from becoming homesick and for you to recognize that you have resources outside of what's in front of you while you're away from home? And then helping them make sure that they understand what the resources are. If they're at college, there are counseling services, there's deans of students, there's resident advisors, there are rabbi, clergies on campus, human resources, insurance benefits. If they're at work, their manager or their mentor can be sources of support for them. So helping them recognize that while the support systems look different when you leave high school, you can find them in different places. So really creating a plan to get ready for that change. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Button to talk a little bit more about how you know whether or not your teen needs professional support.
Thanks, Dr. Okoye. So we've talked a little bit about the setting conditions that we want to encourage parents to create for their teens, right? So we're thinking about mental health as a state of well-being that we can all promote in the teenagers we're caring for and educating and supporting. But as we've said, there are times where teenagers are going to need a little more support. And certainly right now, what we're seeing, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, is an increase in youth who are presenting with suicidal ideation, symptoms of increased anxiety and depression. And there also is some growing evidence that substance use, misuse is increasing across the United States population. And certainly we want to be concerned about adolescents. So we want to make sure you walk away today with a sense of what are some of the signs that you can recognize and how can you reach out to your young person. So let's talk about the signs first. Next slide, please. Now, we don't need to have you turn into an expert clinician to notice what's going on. What we want to encourage you to think about is your teenager's functioning, right? Every teenager has a different baseline setting in terms of what's their temperament, are they a high energy kid, a medium energy kid, a low energy kid, right? They all have different baseline levels of activity and engagement in life. And you know what those are. You know your teens well, right? So what you're looking for in terms of a hint that your young person might need additional support are changes in that level of functioning. And so some of the signs to check out are, is their appearance changing, right? How they're, how are they dressed? How are they caring for their body? What's their hygiene looking like? Is their mood changing, right? A lot of people talk about adolescence as a moody time, right? But intense changes in mood that are disruptive of functioning are not necessarily normative for adolescents. What about their speech patterns, the way they're acting? And particularly because engagement is so important for most adolescents, how are they engaging with their relationships, both with you, but also with their peers? Are they withdrawing, not seeing people, isolating? Any shifts in grades that are dramatic might be a reason for concern, and generally levels of engagement, right? So around 7th or 8th grade, it's normal for young people to start changing what they're interested in and trying out different things. But when you get into high school, if you see your adolescents starting to quit a lot of things or pull out of activities or give up on previously enjoyed activities, that might be a concerning sign. And certainly looking at how their sleep is, right? What's their physical energy level like, right? Are they showing agitation, restlessness, irritability, right? And also, if you see any signs that they might be self-harming, that's also an area of concern. Also, sometimes, right, physical health and mental health, as Dr. Okoye was saying before, they're intricately connected. So a young person who starts to complain of a lot of low-level somatic concerns, isn't feeling themselves, wants to stay in bed, wants to stay home because they're not feeling well, right? We want to make sure and get them checked out by their pediatrician, but that also can be a sign that mental health concerns are emerging. Next slide. So thinking about all of those areas, you might consider reaching out for professional support for your teen if you notice one of these functional concerns, right? So any of those areas are starting to seem too intense to you, right? Trust your gut, right? What does too intense seem like? It's too intense for your adolescent's baseline, your family culture, right? Is it lasting too long? Meaning, right, if a young person is down or anxious for more than a week or two and it's starting to get in the way of their functioning, then it might be time to reach out. Is it too disruptive? Is it getting in the way of family life, right? So a classic example of this is often I'll see families in my work who are saying that their adolescent is argumentative and is sort of picking fights in the family, and it's really disrupting the family life. Well, that actually can be a sign that an adolescent is experiencing depression. For teenagers, often depression manifests as irritability, argumentativeness, and anger. And so we might want to reach out, right? Are problems getting worse? Is functioning getting worse? Or does functioning get a little bit better and then go back down, get a little bit better and then go back down? So you start to see this pattern of, oh, this worry, this fear, this depression, these signs seem to keep coming back, right? And most definitely, if there's any sign of dangerous behavior, increased risk taking, right? And that can be obvious things like substance misuse, but it also can be less obvious things like driving in a highly risky way, right? If you notice your teen is getting in more fender benders than is typical, right? That might be a time to reach out for professional support. We're going to talk more at the end of the slideshow about how to engage in conversations, but we would be remiss if we didn't check in with you about suicidal behavior and ideation in your teenager, right? First of all, we want to say to you, we know that teenagers, many of them, experience suicidal ideation. So, and more recently, post-pandemic, we're seeing an increase in suicidal ideation, actually, particularly in girls, adolescent girls. And so really many teenagers have had these thoughts in their lifetime. Estimates really run from 12, 15% all the way up to 35, 40% of teenagers report that they have thought about dying by suicide at some point in the last year. So we want to encourage you to understand that it does happen. We also want to encourage you to understand that when it happens, a parental reaction is often fear and feeling very gripped. So that's very normal. And we want to make sure you understand that you can't put the idea of suicide in your adolescent's head, and that actually by taking a breath and finding your seat and asking your teen about it, most people will tell you when they're experiencing suicidal ideation that being able to talk about it is a healing thing. So these are some signs that may trigger you to ask your teen if they're thinking about harming themselves in any way. Folks will talk about wanting to end it all or start giving things away. Feelings of guilt or despair or being a burden are often signs that suicidal ideation is brewing. Withdrawal from relationships in everyday life, intense anger, seeking deadly means, right? Access to deadly means, changes in the use of substances, and posting dramatic goodbyes on social media. It's important to know that most people who are expressing these kinds of messages are not seeking attention. They are actually expressing suicidal ideation or exhibiting it. And that most people who have thought about suicide and have had someone intervene report that it's a helpful thing. Most people engaged in suicidal ideation are ambivalent, and reaching out can really, really help them. So don't be afraid to ask your teen if they're upset about something, right? So next slide, please. Some of the questions you might want to ask if they mention suicidal thoughts or behavior, or you see any of those signs, are, you seem really upset. I'm wondering, have you been so upset in the last couple of weeks that you've thought about hurting yourself in some way? Take them seriously, ask questions, calmly get the information you need to get them help. Take a break and breathe if you can't stay calm. And if they are expressing suicidal ideation, connect them to a mental health professional for an assessment and crisis service as soon as possible. We're going to give you some crisis resources at the end. And we also encourage you to make sure you know what the resources are in your community. If a teenager is expressing suicidal thoughts or behaviors, don't leave them alone. Stay with them. Wait until help arrives, or bring them to an emergency room if possible, and make sure that someone stays with them. And also, you can do this whether or not you're worried about your teen. Lethal means safety is one of the most powerful ways to keep teenagers safe from suicidal ideation, to keep homes safe when folks are struggling with mental health challenges. And what we mean by that is safe gun storage, safe medication storage, right? Make sure that guns and ammunition are locked up separately. Make sure that large amounts of medication are not accessible, and make sure that high potentially lethal medications like benzodiazepines or Tylenol are locked up in a secure location. This is a really powerful way that we can put a little time and space between the impulse to harm oneself and the means to do that. So what we'd like to do now is step back a little bit and focus on conversation skills, because, right, that's all well and good for us to say to you, reach out to your teen, right? But what are some of the things that we can actually do to reach out to our teenagers in effective ways? It's not always easy to talk to them. I have two 14-year-olds at home. I know this well. I'm a national expert, and yet I find myself often in the position of being told, I'm fine, Mom, I'm fine. So what are some of the things that we can do?
Yeah, as you were talking, Dr. Button, I was thinking that folks in the audience might want to know how to begin that conversation, right? So like, what's really the first step? What does that conversation look like? What are some more concrete things that we can offer folks?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, one of the biggest pieces that we can think about is engaging in open-ended, gentle questioning. Avoid declarative language, right? So think about the difference between, you're so angry this week, what's your problem? Versus very specifically and gently saying, I'm worried about you, Wenamo. You seem like you've been really frustrated a lot this week, and you're saying you're very, very angry, and you look like you're having a hard time focusing. How can I help? What's up? Right? So listen to the difference there, right? So avoiding those declarative languages, managing your own emotion when you're worried about your kid, right? And also when your teenager says something controversial, so I'm going to say something controversial, and Wenamo, Dr. Okoye, is going to respond to me in a way that probably won't help. And then she's going to respond to the same statement in the way that probably will. I hate Mr. Zahedi. I hate the principal, and I want to kill him, Mom. I just want to kill him.
Now you're just being ridiculous. I don't know why you would say something like that. You're so lucky. Like, your life is so easy. He's done everything that he can to help you. Just go to your room. Come on. Life's not that hard.
So time, right? So that was an invalidating and incendiary response. Now, is it a natural response? No, we get scared and nervous when our teenager says something dramatic and also says, I'm going to do something that's going to get me in a very deep set of hot water at school, right? But remember, validation is not agreement. So let's try that again. I hate Dr. Smith, and I'm going to kill him tomorrow. I'm going to walk up to him and punch him in the face.
I get that you're angry, Susie. I understand that. And I think something's going on with you. Let's talk about that. What's going on? Why are you so angry?
He embarrassed me today. He told me right in front of all my friends that I was a loser. right? So that's right there you go, right? That's an opening, right? I don't really want to kill the principal. What I want to do is have my mom hear that I was really humiliated by the principal today, right? And so there's sort of two ways to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good concrete example of how anything our young people are saying to us is an opener to the conversation, right? And I taught adolescents for a really long time, and at this age, they're all about themselves, right? So it's really important for us to make it about them and not make it about ourselves, and try to put ourselves in their shoes and figure out how we can use this maybe as a skill building moment to help them reflect on their coping skills, to sort of use every opportunity where they're letting us know what their emotions are and how they're feeling as a teaching and learning opportunity for us and them.
Yeah, well said. And one of the things to remember too is that with adolescents, we have to keep circling around the back door, I like to call it, because a lot of times when we ask a question like, what's bothering you? They won't necessarily answer us. They'll say nothing, right? Leave me alone. I don't want to talk about it, right? So we have to continue to use that gentle questioning. Hey, what's up? You seem really down ever since you had that conversation with your friend. I'm here to listen if you want to talk to me. And another really powerful trick for adolescents is to set up conversations in situations where you're not looking each other in the eye, actually. Because adolescents, particularly with their parents, will feel overstimulated by eye contact with someone they're deeply attached to and talking about something difficult at the same time. So I often tell people to do something called the Danbury Mall trip. The Danbury Mall is a mall that's about an hour and a half from the Hudson Valley where I practice and live. And so it's a really enticing mall because it's got lots of good stores. It's a really big place. So pop your kid in the car, go for a walk if you're not a driver of a car and there's not a mall to drive to, work on a project together. And when you're in that drive, right, ask a few gentle questions, get that conversation going. Often easier for adolescents to do that kind of talking when there's a little bit of a distraction and a little bit of distance between you and them visually.
Yeah, definitely. And something else I think that's a really, really good point, because I think the assumption is that you've got to sit them down across the table, maybe do it at a meal, sometimes I think I found myself in positions, even though I know what's going on, where I force them to look me in the eye, right? So you're then like, give me eye contact, show me that you're looking at me. And it's really not even providing the opportunity, it's closing the door rather than opening it. And something else that I wanted to just add on to what you said was around the concept of not every conversation, so not every walk is going to end in a resolution. So we should treat every conversation as though it's an opening and a link to another conversation that might lead to something down the road. So it's rare that you're going to have a breakthrough conversation with your child where everything's fixed, while as parents, fixing your kid and providing solutions can be the gut response and what you really want to do and what makes you feel fulfilled. But it's a matter of keeping that door open. So having the first conversation, maybe they shut down the first time, but going back again and saying and showing empathy, showing support again, trying a different type of opener, looping back each time, even when rejected, even when they're shut down, and then giving them opportunities to know that you are providing a non-judgmental space for them to talk about what they're talking about. So I think that it's really important to not think of it as just one conversation, but as a string of conversations that goes on that are linked to each other and are building that relationship.
It's really well said, Winnemon. I think what you're also pointing out is the courage it takes to parent an adolescent, because sometimes you get rebuffed and sometimes you get humiliated and you have to sort of keep on trucking, take a deep breath and come back around again. I also really like this piece about don't look for resolution, because that can be particularly hard, right? I'm parenting two 14-year-olds who up until about a year ago had terrific common sense. But all of a sudden at our house, my husband and I often say, our house is filled with stupid people because they're 14 years old and suddenly they've lost some of the skill sets that they had for many years. So as a parent, when your teenager says something that is completely lacking in common sense, it's logical that you want to get them to the place where they're making sense again and they're showing good judgment. But actually, it's counterintuitive. It's not a time to teach anymore for adolescents, right? It's a time to elicit their thinking. So when they do express a very angry or very negative or very hopeless thought, you want to listen, but you also want to ask them questions to get them to learn how to self-regulate. Things like, wow, so what do you think needs to happen here? Like, what would help the situation? How would you handle it if you were your friend? Like, you're saying she talked to you in a way that was really mean. If you had that to say to a friend, what would you say instead? Starting to ask your teenager to think it through for themselves and get themselves to a place of logic and calming and self-regulation. And as Weno said, it's not always going to happen in one conversation. As a matter of fact, it's going to take 2 to 6 years to really have their brain complete the development that it's doing. So you want to keep having those curious, open conversations with them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. And having those conversations is part of it, but another important part of it is helping them build these skill sets, which we kind of talked about a little bit with the transition to high school. Some of those could be giving them chores, kind of scaffolding for them. So like if they're not yet ready to make their doctor's appointments, how can you make the phone call, but they put it on their calendar. They set a reminder, and then next time they make the phone call, then put it on their calendar and set the reminder. They drive themselves there. Maybe you go with them the first time, but it doesn't have to be just just throwing them out into the world release. It can be scaffolded both for you and for them, because I think it can be difficult for parents to let go as well. Help them learn how to get organized with their chores, ask them questions, give them opportunities to ask you questions, maybe do laundry together, and use it as an opportunity to build a bond, but also help them develop an independent skill. There were a number of students when I went to college who had never done laundry before and did the classic red sock in with the all whites, and ended up wearing pink for the rest of the semester. And then sort of role modeling what that looked like.
Yeah, and if you have a younger teen, it's important to start thinking about what we're describing now. One example is at your annual pediatrics appointments from 7th grade on, you should be first offering your tween time alone with their pediatrician, and then by 8th, 9th grade, really sort of saying, I'm going to come in and check in with the doctor, and then I'm going to wait out in the waiting room, right? Giving your teen time to sort of shape their own relationship with their caring professionals. The same with money management, right? Wenemo mentioned overdrafting her account in college, right? Start thinking about changing the way you give them their allowance, if you give them an allowance, right? Or shifting from giving them money when they need it to giving them some allowance, right? So give them a debit card that has half of their year's allowance on it and say, you have to make this work for 6 months, and I'm not going to give you cash for your week-to-week events, right? And then help them talk it through. So you can do a lot of things when they're younger that start getting them ready, right? Think about the last time your teenager said to you, I think for me it was about 3 hours ago, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Auntie, where is the laundry soap? Where's the toilet paper? Where's the cat food? So your answer should start to be in 7th, 8th, 9th grade. Where do you think we might be keeping that? Can you remember where you found it before? Or go take a look up in the bathroom cabinet. See if you can find where it might be. Beginning to sort of ease off of doing things for your tween and your young teen and start scaffolding them, right? Scaffolding means giving them just enough support to do it on their own. And again, that's going to be different for different teens, right? For some teens who have executive function challenges, we might scaffold them a little more tightly, do the laundry with them, walk upstairs, open the cabinet, help them find the toilet paper, right? But we want to really start thinking about, I like to tell parents, start reeling the fish line out, right? You know how you let a fish sort of pull and go out into the water for a while? Your job as a parent with an adolescent is actually to keep reeling that out all the way into the middle of the lake until they're ready to swim on their own, right? And it's going to look different sometimes when your teen is stressed. Certainly in the pandemic, one of the things I've noticed with my own teens and with teens I treat, there's been an interruption in their developmental independence process. They've sort of stopped cold, right? And so, for example, with my 14-year-olds, when I say to them, why don't you text your friends and set up a recreational activity, you know, go to the pool together, they act as if I've asked them to run naked down the street. And that's because the pandemic started when they had just turned 13 and they were just starting to use their phones independently to sometimes reach out to a few close friends, and then all activities were stopped. So you may need to sort of back your developmental clock up a little bit, give them a little more scaffolding and support, right? And sort of give them some time to make up for this lost time, because they have had a real interruption in that independent time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about, I think the pandemic is something we have to consider, right? This has not been a normal, what are we at now? 17 months? I'm not sure.
17 months, yeah.
Yeah, 17 months of being at home. A lot of us have spent a lot of time with our families, more time than we were ever supposed to spend with our families, and less time with our peers. And we've seen in our high schoolers a lot of loneliness and isolation, increased anxiety and depression related to the pandemic. So there are these, I think we've kind of talked about these general things that we need to think about with regard to the developmental stage that adolescents are in as they're transitioning out of high school. But what are the things that we're going to have to just figure out as we go with regard to the pandemic? They're not only they're transitioning from a period of being inside with their families mostly for 17 months to maybe going off to college or a gap year, or entering the workforce where they have to be social and independent. So I think that scaffolding is going to be even more important. And we can use the summertime to think about how we can build in those supports to help young people transition out of this really weird time at a critical point in their lives.
I think that's really important to think about, Wenema, because I think as a parent, I know that I've gotten in the habit of doing more for my teens than I used to do before the pandemic happened. So I think it sort of goes both ways, right? That we've all been living in the same house, sort of doing things together. And it hasn't been the times when they're away from me, they're naturally away from me and managing life on their own, were dramatically reduced. And so what that means for on the parenting side is we have to sort of say, okay, wait a minute. Is it time for them to start walking to school without me? Do I really need to take them to the subway stop now? Can I take them halfway and then let them go the rest of the way to the subway stop on their way to school, right? What are some of the ways I can start backing off of all of the time we spent together and all of the closeness and connection? The opposite is true as well. Your teenager might be pushing you away and just sort of out in the world and not coming home. And that might be a little nerve-wracking for you, but actually it's really helpful to your teen, right? To be able to spend a little time outside the house and get their sea legs before they go off into young adult life. So we have to be really mindful of the impact the pandemic has had on all of us and sort of the automaticity of that, right? And start thinking about it in a new way. Yeah. Really well said.
Mm-hmm. And then something else that we didn't really get to touch on in our presentation, but we've got some time, but would love for audience folks to queue up questions, because we're going to move to Q&A in about 5 minutes or so, and would love to be able to answer your questions with the time that we have left. Is that this is a critical point for identity development too, right? So for students who are adolescents in general, this time is hard, but if students identify as LGBTQ+, or if they're students of color navigating 2020 and the racial trauma of the last year, and hearing all these messages, identity development and the trauma that they've experienced related to their identity might be compounding the issues that we're seeing. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Susie.
Yeah. Well, I always like to back parents up to setting conditions around identity development. And it's sort of the same as what you talked about at the beginning around mental health, right? What are your attitudes? How do you communicate about identity with your kids? What do you self-disclose, and how do you frame things at home, right? So one of the examples is, do you say things like, when you get married, or you'll make a great husband, or, when are you going to meet a nice boy and start dating, right? When we talk to adolescents, it's important to give them the openings around identity, for example, for LGBTQ plus, right? So when you ask your teens, are you starting to have crushes, right? That doesn't scope out a heteronormative idea. But also for issues around racialized trauma and racial identity, the same thing. What are the setting conditions that you bring at home? Do you talk openly with your kids, right? We want to sort of normalize the fact that oppression can lead to traumatizing experiences and feelings of really traumatic stress. So are you open about that? Do you teach your kids coping mechanisms? Do you disclose how you manage those things? By talking about these issues openly, we put a little space in for our teen that lets them start to understand that these experiences of oppression are not normative, right? In terms of they don't have to just suck it up. There's something we have to sort of learn how to relate to, advocate against, manage, right? We can be more active as we frame it. And Wenemo, I know that you talk a lot with educators about these issues, and how do you sort of create those healing environments when young people are stressed by racialized trauma, the events of the last year, some of the language and imagery that's been flying around? What are some things parents can do with that?
Yeah. So again, going back to validating their experiences is really important, right? So I think a lot of times in families of color, there can be a gut intuition of like hardening and survival. And it is important, right? It's a critically important skill to be able to survive. However, doesn't open the door for healing the pain that one's experienced. So, and a lot of the pain might have been inflicted on the system that they're in and society, right? And parents are kind of taking that information home while experiencing it themselves. But there's so much healing that can happen in community building and in conversation, and building connection and being able to talk openly and transparently about how something is, how one is feeling something and the root causes of it. So being clear about what the wound is, and then healing that wound through conversation and connection, and getting your kid help if they need it outside. So if they need connection to a therapist, the process, then offering that. But connection is key with you, with peers who share their identity, and who are going to accept them, as well as role models that they might be able to talk to, who might be you or folks outside of your family. So that connection, I think, is really important. And then validating their identity as much as possible. So a lot of this work, and when we talk to schools, is what is the work that you're doing with yourself, and what are you modeling for young people? So if I am suffering as a parent, I'm suffering with I'm not dealing with the racial trauma I'm experiencing. I've got a lot of internalized racism, and most of what I do is try to help my child assimilate. That's not going to help with their racial identity development. Same thing for students who identify as LGBTQ plus, right? So even if you might accept your child's sexual identity or sexual orientation identity, or gender identity, whatever it might be, and you tell them to make their lives easier by assimilating or blending in different ways, that's not going to help or facilitate their identity development. More than anything else, they need to feel as though they belong at home, that they're able to talk freely about who they are at home, ask questions, about who they are, and they need to see the ways that you are leaning into your identity development, and that you're pulling out your identity not just as not as a negative and as something that's caused your oppression, but also something that is an instrument of your resilience and who you are and how you show up in the world. So young people need to feel as though they can be authentic, and the first place they learn that is at home. And school help can also, which is why we push this work with schools. Schools can also help young people with that identity development and feeling as though they belong regardless of their identities, or even because of their identities, right? That they're able to show those fully. It's complicated, it's hard work because we're swimming upstream, but it's really critically important.
And thinking again about that subtlety of parenting as you're describing these ways to build strength around identity, right? It really does mean working your own edge as a parent, your judgments, your values, your own challenges with experiences of oppression, so that you can work that edge with your teen, right? It takes courage.
Yeah, it does. And being here today is definitely a first step, right? Learning. I think Aliki has some questions from the audience for us.
I do. It is now the Q&A portion. And I will get these. Our first question would be, when you talk to your child, like in the example where the principal called him or her a loser, how do you continue that conversation? And then the next question would be, maybe the principal did call the child a loser. What do you do next?
Great question. Yeah, so remember we talked about that validating response that Wenmo exhibited when I threatened to kill the principal, right? And then something was disclosed that was tremendously vulnerable. And so remember what we talked about: avoiding declarative language, validating the emotional experience of that, and then helping your teen parse out what the next best steps are. Right. So my tendency is, well, I'm going to go to the principal and deck the principal, right? I'm my kid's parent and you'd call my parent a loser. But what's the next best step, right? We're not sure. It's going to depend on your teen, what they think is best. And then you're sharing with them some advocacy strategies, right? And making sure they understand that the principal calling them a loser was not okay. You can message that, and then you can help your child, right, brainstorm what are the strategies that need to happen, and you can scaffold as much or as little as your teenager wants, right? But that sort of reflects what Wenemo was talking about in terms of it's sharing your own emotion about it in a gentle way. It's validating that it is not okay. And then it's helping to brainstorm and build the self-advocacy mechanisms that your teenager needs to learn. But they need to have some volition in that, right? We don't want to re-victimize or re-traumatize them by stepping over them and going in and doing what we think is best. Wenemo, what do you think?
Yeah, I think my gut too would be like, go to talk to the principal and like, defend your child, make sure that they know that you're on their side, and really armor them. But in their mind, especially as a teenager, like, no, that's going to make it worse. People will see, people will know, it'll embarrass them. So I think it's an opportunity, just thinking about that skill building, to allow young people to resolve problems on their own and to show them that you're going to support them in the way they want to resolve that problem. And of course, there are boundaries, right? So like if they say the response is like, no, I'm just going to like be mean to him all year. Like, I'm not going to go to school. But you as a parent have to set the boundary around like, all right, so you have to go to school. You have to continue going to this school. I want you to feel comfortable going to school. I want you to be able to deal with your anger towards this principal. And I don't want you to feel like you're a loser going to school. So given those things, if those are the constraints and the boundaries around this thing, what do you think we should do? And I'm here to bounce ideas off of you. I might throw some at you. What do you think about that? And then you're problem solving together as though they're an equal. So as an adolescent, they have independent thoughts and ideas of their own. And oftentimes adultism tells us that we have to be the ones who come up with the solution. We can provide the boundaries because they need those. And there have to be constraints in order for them to feel safe. But within those boundaries, there are a lot of different things that can happen, and they might have some creative ideas that we don't.
Thank you. And we also have time for one more question. So should school counselors require check-in appointments with students or work to create a welcoming drop-in environment, or both?
We have like 2 minutes to answer this question.
Can we answer the question differently? Can we say that in our minds, and I think each of our team members has said this to one another in the last 3 months, we want to make sure that educators, teachers who are going to be the first footfall for teenagers when they come back to school in September or August, that teenagers are checking in on the emotional health of the teens in their classrooms, and that there are multiple steps of open check-ins. So not just the counselor's office, but the entire building has to be understanding that learning readiness is really going to be facilitated by a community of caring that is focused on checking in on the emotional health and well-being of the teens as they walk in the door. So that's the leaders who are standing in the door, the ladies at the office who kids are signing in when they're coming late to school, the teachers who the kids are walking first footfall into the building and sitting down for the first time, and then absolutely the counselors. But we don't want the counselors to be holding the whole ball here.
Yeah, well said. Well said. It's we have to build systems that can support students regardless of where they enter the system. There is one question here that's like, there are a couple questions here that I don't know that we have time for, but like very specific around religiosity and mental health. And that I think is, and this is a system level answer, but I think engaging clergy and engaging faith institutions as much as possible in these conversations is really important, because oftentimes faith leaders are aware of mental health issues and can be very convincing in helping folks in their congregations or their mosque or their synagogue to bring them along. So in New York City, there was an organization I worked with who did a lot of work training faith leaders about how to encourage mental health referrals. So I'm not sure exactly what your role is, but partnering with the local faith institutions, I think, can really help with this, because it is an issue, and those tend to be the community hubs that folks trust.
So thank you for that, Winimo. As Winimo has mentioned, unfortunately, we won't be able to get to everyone's question, but please feel free to email. I'll drop my email into the chat. And with any questions you may have, please email me at allegiatejedfoundation.org, and we will answer those questions. So in the meantime, we're going to share some resources. So Winimo, please share your screen.
Sure.
And Winimo, I can go through the resources if you want to finish typing that answer.
Okay, please.
You're trying to get that done. Yeah.
Sorry, sure.
I answered the book question already.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm like struggling to share screen a little bit, folks. And my computer's freezing.
It wouldn't be Wednesday without tech, probably.
We're doing so well. Thank y'all for your patience. Okay. Yeah, my slideshow is frozen, y'all.
Well, I can sort of go through them by memory. One of the things we really like to recommend is that you make sure that your teen has crisis text line. We really feel there is no better resource for teenagers to have the number in their phone. If you don't know it, look it up. It's easily accessible on the web too, crisis text line. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is a great resource for teens to have. The Trevor Project, which is a project especially supportive of LGBTQ plus individuals and young adults and adolescents, has a hotline for LGBTQ plus teens who are and young adults who are struggling struggling with suicidal ideation, because it is something that happens more frequently for young people who have lots of experiences with oppression and marginalization. So also true for teens of color, right? They can struggle with some of these emotions and thoughts a little more sometimes. And then finally, we want to just point you to the JED website. Our JED website has lots of resources that are, some of which are for parents, some of which are for educators, and many of which are youth facing, right? To help youth learn to reach out to their peers, which also teaches them to reach out when they need help, and to help sort of frame mental health, as we said, as a state of mental health and well-being that can be worked toward. And also we do a lot of work destigmatizing mental health needs for teens. So you can find many resources there to help teens learn about their own mental health and sort of get a sense that it's okay to reach out.
Okay, thank you, Susie. And I'm just going to put these resources into the chat.
Thanks, Aliki. You're saving us from tech freezing. Oh, great. Yep. Oh, and also Aliki's putting in the Trans Lifeline, right? Another really important resource. And I also want to recommend, there's a website called, there's Therapy for Black Girls, and there's also Therapy for Black Men. And these are websites in which someone was asking about helping kids of color access therapists who in whom they can see themselves, right? And these are two great websites by the same vendors where vetted therapists of color are available. There's also, Aliki, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but we found one that's also well vetted for Asian and AAPI therapists, right? Mm-hmm. I can't remember the name of it, but if you Google it, you can find it. So these are great places for you to find. Actually, many people are offering virtual services now, right? It's a place where you can connect teens to therapists in whom they can see their identities reflected, which is really, really important.
Yeah, it's a really good question because it can be a challenge for folks. So I think we can close there. At least, like, you wanna close this out?
Thank you all for attending. It was great. Thank you, Suzanne Button and Wenemo Okoya, for sharing your knowledge. We just want to say bye.